And a good evening, ladies and gentlemen, to what I'm ashamed to say, I'm ashamed? I'm ashamed? I'm not ashamed, but I'm afraid to say, rather, is the final round this year of the Strawberry.com Formula Alpha Championship for 2023. Yes, on the 13th of December, right at the end of the year, we say goodbye to what has been a very exciting championship indeed. We're here, of course, at Yas Marina, as is tradition now, to see these cars off. Currently in qualifying, of course, just over 10 minutes to go in this session, and as we've seen so many times throughout this season, this session currently being led by Will Inglis. A 1 minute 34.785 sees him with provisional pole with about 0.3 of a second margin to Alan Matthews, his nearest rival so far. Then we have, is that Andrew Ramett or Paul Brady? Get your votes in, people. It is, in fact, Paul Brady with a 1:35.6. Currently running in P3. Then we have Paul Millman, P4, 1:37.9. Guy Ulrich in 1:38. We have a couple more drivers as well out on track who are yet to set a fast lap, I believe. So it's shaping up to be a very interesting qualifying indeed. We've seen slightly lower numbers as we go later into the seasons, of course, just as, you know, life gets busy in December, of course. And as Will Inglis gently says hello to the inside wall there before coming into the pits, a la Valtteri Bottas in Mexico in 2019. Does dive into the pits, though. Yes, we've seen lower numbers, but that hasn't seemed to have affected the racing, really. If anything, the racing has been even more exciting than it has been prior. It has, yeah, I've left the past few rounds with a sore throat, and I don't think that's any winter flu coming in. That's just some fantastic racing. So hopefully we'll get more of that this evening, especially as we are, of course, on the revised layout of Yas Marina, with a few corners taken out, opened up, made wider, made faster. Has improved the racing, I would argue, and I'm sure you would agree. We actually were in here on Sunday in the Giulia Zagato GT3s, and while they are a tricky car to drive, shall we say, I think all the drivers, including myself, were in agreement that the changes to the track are certainly positive and make this track easier to overtake on and improve the racing just a little bit more, which is what we like to see with 8 minutes to go in this session. Let's have a look at who we have out on the track and how the qualifying session has shaped up for them so far. So then we have a look, of course, at Will Inglis, who has, as you can see, led this session for a little while. He's actually got the fewest number of laps out of any driver. We're going to go on board with him at the moment because he's got some traffic to contend with here as they head just through that chicane. That chicane is so important to nail. It's one of the prime overtaking opportunities, of course, but you want to get the best run out of it because you have this long, what is of course it's curved, but it's effectively another straight here at Yas Marina. You want to nail that chicane before it to gain some substantial time on the lap if you do so as well. The next big gains on the lap are this corner that we're heading through now, as we head into the hotel section in just a moment's time here. And then the next proper gaining opportunity is through Sector 1, the sweeping left and right handers before you run into the hairpin onto the back straight, of course. Also important to make sure you get a good run down the straight. So really, this entire track is very important to get right. You can make a lot of time in most of the corners here. I'd say you can be a little bit more relaxed, if you will, through the final couple of corners on the lap. But aside from that, it's important to nail everything here at Yas Marina. We're on board with Will Inglis at the moment, who has nailed everything so far. 7 laps to his name, least number of laps out of anyone, actually. The most number of laps goes to Paul Brady, Alan Matthews. We're going to have a look at Paul Brady, actually, as he does improve through that first sector. It beats Alan Matthews' previous attempt, actually, a 49.2. As you can see in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, predicted a 35.4 so far. So not looking to gain a position, but consolidate his current one as things stand on this lap. And we will, of course, talk a little bit about setup throughout this weekend, because it is very important here at Yas Marina. You want some decent downforce for the high-speed corners, but when it comes down to the straights, you want nothing at all. You need a stable rear end, but you also need to make sure the car isn't too understeery. So, while on face value, you can see those massive straights, especially the first one, and the cornered straight after it, if you will. It is not the lowest downforce track by any means. You need to click in a little bit of wing here or there in order to get the car to respond well. And Paul Brady's car certainly has responded well on this lap so far. In fact, that doesn't make any sense at all. He just started a new lap. So not sure what's going on with the timing system here. We'll try and get that fresh for you just in a moment's time here. See Will Inglis starting a new lap here. These will be the final few attempts in this session now, with 5.5 minutes to go in this session. Each lap is about 96 seconds, 1 minute 34, 1 minute 35, 1 minute 36. So this gives the drivers 2 or 3 more laps before the timer hits 0, and they need to be crossing the line before that, of course, to get the proper final attempts in. I can tell you Will Inglis has just gone purple through what looks to be the second second. I'm going to get these timing issues resolved and be back with you in just a moment. And with just a minute to go in this session, then we're on board at the moment with Will Inglis as he looks to improve on his already improved time. Can he do so? He will just about do so, I think. No, doesn't quite make it in the end, but only by 8 thousandths of a second, of course. He was in the 134.7 region just a couple of laps ago, and then has smashed a 1 minute 34.3 in there, which, as it turns out, he needed to do, because just crossing the line last time out was Alan Matthews with a 134.7. Let's see if he can improve upon that again. Is he borrowing Paul Millman's? Alan Matthews is borrowing Paul Millman's car. That probably... That won't get confusing at all, I am sure. They're actually on the same part of the track as well. That should be interesting. Do we have any other swap arounds of livery just to spice things up a little bit for the final round? No, Paul Brady's in his car. Guy Swarbrick's in his car. No, it is just Alan Matthews and Paul Millman. Then as we watch Alan Matthews head into the final corner complex, now the timer does indeed hit 0, and all drivers are actually on their last laps now. Drivers will not be able to get another fast lap attempting, so these are laps that are going to make the difference now. As Alan Matthews crosses the line, will it be an improvement? It is a massive improvement. I can tell you it's not on the screen there, but it's a 135.351, so by 400ths of a second, it is Alan Matthews on pole here at Yas Marina. Next to cross line was Paul Millman, 37.9. Then we have Will Inglis. Once again, he pits in the end. Nothing that he can do here in the end. Then one car left to go. It is Paul Brady at 135.2 to 135.7 on that last lap. And that rounds out qualifying for this evening for the finale here at Yas Marina of the Swarbrick.com Formula Alpha 2023 Championship. We'll join you in just a few minutes for round 1. So here we are, ladies and gentlemen, just over 30 seconds to go now until lights out, and I can confirm, unfortunately, and apologies for my mistake on this one, Alan Matthews in qualifying, it looked like his lap was invalidated or something. He has ended up in P2. So it's Will Inglis on pole position, and it's a Will Inglis, Alan Matthews front row, Paul Brady, Guy Swarbrick on the second, and then Paul Millman, Jack Hodson rounding out the third row. 6 cars in the field then this evening. 20 seconds to go. Should be some fine racing indeed. We've seen on countless occasions and in the championship as well, the battle between Alan Matthews and Will Inglis is always a spicy one, and it will be here once more as the revs begin to rise. We have 6 red lights on the gantry, and we are away for 25 minutes here at Yas Marina. Push the pass already for Will Inglis as he tries to get that advantage heading into the first corner, and that advantage he does get as it's now Alan Matthews and Paul Brady battling it out as we head into the next couple of corners, with Alan Matthews winning out this around, Paul Brady giving it his utmost, but nothing he could do just yet. It's still only 2 or 3 corners into this race, though. We'll watch as Will Inglis heads into the hairpin at the bottom of the back straight with a 1.2 second lead in this race so far. He will, however, be providing everyone else in this session with a lovely tow down that start-finish straight, and he's used push the pass, of course. I'll try it again. Push the pass, of course, and all the other drivers haven't, so they close up that gap to now just 0.5 of a second as we head into the chicane. The brake disc glowing red hot, getting the car stopped from the dizzying heights of the high 100s of miles an hour, and we get back on to the throttle once again for another straight. Who is that? That's Guy Swarbrick on the push-to-pass system now as he tries to close up that gap to Paul Brady. Has a look around the outside, nothing that he can do from here just yet, and decides to stay in formation for at least a couple more corners. Or does he? No, he doesn't. There we can see him once again looking at the outside line of the corner here. And we're going to head into the hotel section now as that is Paul Millman going wide, too deep onto the brakes and off into the infield. I've done the same thing at this track in the GT3 car plenty of times over the past couple of days. It's one of those corners that lures you into a false sense of security, and all of a sudden, bang, the corner is there. It's pretty much a 90-degree corner. It looks quite nice and wide open, but it certainly isn't. As we head back onto the next lap, and now it is Will Inglis still leading this race, expanding that gap up to near enough, makes no difference 1 second, as Paul Millman and Guy Swarbrick continue on. They haven't battled yet, but this is their first chance to battle because it looks like Guy Swarbrick has had an issue and has dropped a couple of positions. Only lost 1 position, of course, but now he's going to try and fight Paul Millman in order to get that position back. And we get back onto the back straight once again. That is Jack Hodson. Jack Hodson has had a big incident, 72 kilometers an hour heading through that last corner there, and unfortunately for him, no rear wing, no front wing to speak of on his car, so he's going to have a less than enjoyable race. Guy Swarbrick looks to be having a slightly more enjoyable one now as he makes contact, or rather Paul Millman makes contact with him with a nice overtake there into the chicane from Guy Swarbrick. And he continues on now using that push-to-pass system. Good use of it there onto the exit of that long straight, gives him a nice margin to the car behind. As we go back on board with Alan Matthews now also in the Paul Millman livery, of course, as he tries his utmost to keep up with Will Inglis, and is doing a mighty fine job of it, it must be said, as Will Inglis wants to see out this championship in the way that it is really gone for him most of the year. These two are the closest on track at this point in the time order, battling for P1 here in this race so far. Again, another corner that lures you into a false sense of security. The final corner, the final right-hander. It's so easy to ride over those curbs, and at least in a GT3 car it doesn't upset it too much, but in a single-seater it certainly will upset the car, as we saw at the end of this year's Formula 1 season with Lando Norris in qualifying. Yeah, it can upset the single-seater cars a little bit, and again, you just get kind of spat off to the left-hand corner of the track, and it is up to you to get back underway before you find the grandstands. As Jack Hodson, unfortunately, dropping out of this race, probably not into the groove of things this weekend, not here for qualifying, and I don't believe here for practice either. So it takes. I did notice this actually over the past few days. Yas Marina is one of those circuits where you really do need to get into a nice rhythm and a nice groove, and if you don't, the lap times are just nowhere to be found. I think it goes back to what we were saying in qualifying about how each corner is a really strong opportunity to make some time. I think if you're not confident with the track in its entirety, you will start bleeding time, or you will have errors. And if that has been the case for Jack Oulton, not only is he bleeding time in that way, but he's also running along with no wing at all. So unfortunately, he does drop out of this race then. Of course, Will Inglis, the strongest out of all the drivers. Apologies, completely wrong. I've been thinking about touring cars. I'm so sorry. Paul Brady currently in P2 by a fairly clear margin as well. 259 points to his name in this championship. So he is currently in P3. So ignore everything I've said. Not to say that Will Inglis isn't a great driver, of course. We saw in the touring cars that he is. But it's been a long day for Reeve today. Reeve has had to work on many. I've been mending cars today, and unfortunately it wasn't an Alfa Romeo, it was a BMW, and they don't make things easy. Who knew there were so many varieties of Torx bolt? So yeah, that is completely my mistake, as I've been saying for all of this season. It is Paul Brady who is the strongest in the championship here with us this evening. 259 points to his name. He can't close that gap to Matt Daly. Matt Daly taking the crown in the single-seater, so congratulations to him. But Paul Brady doesn't even need to defend P2 as well, no matter where he finishes in this race. It is 259 points on the board for him so far. He is poised to take away a couple more this evening, and it's Will Inglis in P3. He is 25 points clear of Alex Smith, again unfortunately not here this evening. Jack Oulton is his nearest rival in this session so far, and of course the race not going his way so far. So Will Inglis also feeling fairly comfortable there. Alan Matthews, though. Alan Matthews will be jumping up a position because Jack Oulton not here this evening. And Alan Matthews, even if he tumbles all the way to the back end of the running, and I doubt he will, given his pace at the moment, he will overtake because he's only 1 point behind in P6, so he will jump up into P5. Paul Newman, strong season for him so far. 96 points to his name. So he'll be looking to take a few more and cross that 100. In fact, he will be crossing that 100-point marker, which is a nice objective to aim for. Nice Robic as well will be taking home a decent number of points this evening as well, cementing his position ahead of Andy Craker and closing up that gap to Steve Knight. Steve Knight, who was had a fairly decent season in both the touring car and single seaters, not setting electric at times, but has been improving this year by looks of things. So we hope that continues on into 2024 and in the Winter Series coming up over the next few weeks. So more news on that to come. Plenty of action in the world of the AROC racing leagues as we look to try new and interesting things with our sim racing antics. As we go on board with Will Inglis, he is leading this race and leading it well. Fastest car on track at this point in time to 135.3. His best lap so far, 135. That would be very impressive if it was a 131. 135.1. So he is not only fastest overall, but currently on the best pace as well. Can't breathe easy just yet, though, because he does still only have Alan Matthews 2 seconds behind. And in fact, Alan Matthews, while previously being focused on trying to take that P1, he settled in and decided, you know what, maybe the race win isn't going to be what I'm going for. Instead, he might have to worry about defending from Paul Brady. And in fact, he really will now. The commentator's curse for I hope is one final time this evening, is in full effect. It's just typical of my commentary this season, really, isn't it? As it gets back underway, but with no front wing. That was a decent bump with the curb on that, with the wall on that final corner. As I was saying before, that curb can really upset a single seater, and we're seeing evidence of that now. So that is Paul Brady into P2. You can see already Alan Matthews struggling with that front wing. It is making it a little bit understeery, and through that, I think out of all of the corners, it's that sector 1 section there where there is changes in elevation, and it is still decently high speeds where you really suffer with some front wing damage and some understeer, and that is what Alan Matthews has. So commiserations, Alan. That car is not going to be entirely fun to drive anymore. Has, however, made his race a little bit. It's made the race a little bit easier for Paul Brady, who is now got a 7-second margin to Alan Matthews behind, and a nice 4-second margin to P1. So another P2 potentially on the cards for Paul Brady here, although I don't want to say anything just yet because apparently the commentator's curse is somewhat of a benevolent force in this evening's racing. As we see, the time's actually starting to drop a little bit now for the cars on track as we get to that stage in the race where the fuel load has got lighter, but the tyres haven't dropped off just yet. So people now starting to set their personal best times. Next to do so will be, by the looks of things, will be Paul Millman, although I believe we're still having some timing discrepancies. Nope. Here we are as Will Inglis crosses the line. Yeah, it appears we have a bit of a delay going on, but it's Paul Millman and Guy Swarbrick who are currently turning up the pace a little bit, which could be cause for concern for Alan Matthews, of course. We knew that Guy had that incident early on, but I didn't see how much damage he is carrying, if he is carrying any damage. And in fact, there's confirmation that Guy Swarbrick is going to be cause for concern for Alan Matthews. Alan deciding this car's undrivable, I need to come into the pits. And that is a disaster for Alan Matthews. That promotes Guy Swarbrick up into P3. So as it stands, Guy Swarbrick on for another podium this season, and that will be great to see. Thoroughly deserved, as well as Alan Matthews tumbling down the order all the way into P5 as he gets that car repaired. And that could be a good call. He needed to make that decision sooner rather than later, of course. The earlier he does pit and turns the pace of the car back into what it should be, the more race he has to close up that gap and take some positions back. So he's about 12 seconds behind. In terms of his best pace, it was a 35.2. Paul Millman's into the 37, so about 2.5 seconds a lap faster. So we should see in about 8 minutes' time, shall we say? 8-10 minutes' time, we should see Alan Matthews back in the mix here and fighting for P4, maybe higher if any antics occur later into the race. We shall see, but maybe Alan Matthews can recover something from this race just yet. Back on board then with Will Inglis. He's extended that gap between him and Paul Brady now at about 4.5 seconds, so found 0.8 over the last couple of laps and is controlling the pace rather nicely. As we see here, Alan Matthews already making inroads into that delta between him and Paul Millman. The gap standing at about 1 second now. He's on for a pretty fast lap, it must be said, at 35.2 predicted at this point in time. He goes purple through the first sector. Of course, in the pits, he gets new tyres. He gets won't adjust the fuel load. Of course, he gets new tyres, he gets a fresh wing and a bit more confidence instilled in him as well. So he can push on that a little bit more, losing some time on the exit of Sector 3 there. Sorry, the entry into Sector 3. But we'll see how this lap shapes up then. He's losing some more time through Sector 3, so very interesting. So what we could be seeing here is that Alan Matthews potentially running a lower downforce setup than some cars around him, which will pay dividends in forms of overtaking and running down those straights, but might cost him a little bit through some of the tighter stuff. Could also be maybe low on the mechanical grip side based on how he has the suspension geometry configured or how the tyre pressures are set up. If he's low on mechanical grip, he's going to lose some time through those more kind of staggered corner entries, which there are fewer of course, on the new layout of Yas Marina. It used to be littered with them, but you know, there's kind of 90-degree brake stamp on it, very Herman Tilke-esque, because of course this is a Tilke-drome. So you lose time through there if you don't have too much mechanical grip. But Alan Matthews seems to be very confident in the cockpit there, because that gap now standing at 7 seconds. There was a 2.5 second margin between him and Paul Millman, so he is going to be very much putting the pressure on in the next couple of laps in this race. Guy Swarbrick currently in a good position here to take away that podium. He's not as close as he'd probably like to be to the likes of Paul Brady, given how the race started as well, of course, where he was very close to Paul Brady, but he has a decent margin to Paul Millman behind, and I don't think with 10 minutes to go in the race he will be under much of a threat from Alan Matthews later on. It's a shame, actually, to see him have that early race incident, is it, for Guy Swarbrick, because it could have been a very, maybe not very close, but it would have been interesting to see him just a few seconds closer to Paul Brady. You know, anything could have happened. Paul Brady may have an incident later on, which he's now somewhat protected from any kind of negative effects of by having such a big margin. But if that wasn't the case, we could have seen a different race playing out later on if Paul Brady had encountered any problems. As we go back on board with Alan Matthews, then we see a very impressive run over the past couple of laps. I do apologise for the notifications you've been hearing in the background. I've just got a new phone and it's in setup mode and it's going mental. It's about the temperature of the surface of the sun at the moment, so it's doing plenty of things in the background, I am sure. Although it is a Samsung and we've seen those get toasted in the past. Yes, Alan Matthews absolutely flying along. I said, you know, maybe with about 3 minutes to go in this race. Well, with 8 minutes to go, he is now just 3 seconds behind Paul Millman here. So he's really putting the pressure on, as Will Inglis is sort of putting the pressure on as well. It's just he doesn't need to put the pressure on anyone. He's running very nicely indeed. About 6 seconds clear now of P2. 10 laps into this race, and is utterly in control. It's a shame that there weren't more weekends like this in this season for Will Inglis. We know he's got great pace. We've seen that from the touring cars. We've seen that from so many weekends like what we're watching here. But more so in the single seaters than the touring cars. It just seemed to be that Will Inglis would occasionally, the odd mistake would just creep in here or there, or a weekend wouldn't work out the way that he wanted. Maybe it was just bad luck, or maybe he'd just be involved in some form of accident here or there, and it has really hampered his season. I think because I think he deserved. Well, maybe he didn't deserve more. Not say he didn't deserve more than P3, but maybe P3 was the right place in the end, purely because there was. But maybe he deserved more points. I think a 100 point margin to Paul Brady isn't entirely representative of the pace that Will Inglis has demonstrated at some points this season. It's just unfortunate the season hasn't quite come together the way that he would have wanted. If we'd had more weekends like this, I think it would have been. It would have been potentially more on the cards for Will Inglis this season. But who knows? Next year we will have change of car, of course, and we might see a change in the championship order. Although whether we'll be able to topple Matt Daly off his throne remains to be seen, because that is a mighty impressive drive from Matt Daly to score that number of points. In fact, over half the grid has. And in fact, it will be even more so when Paul Millman concludes this weekend. It will be more than 2/3 of the grid, actually, will come away with more than 100 points to their name. So that's an impressive feat. I think the driver should be pleased with that one. As we now enter the 34s, the fuel loads getting really quite light in the cars now. 12 laps into the race. The tyres might be happy at some points of the lap. It's places like the start of Sector 1 where the tyre temperatures really increase. Luckily, they do have a chance to cool down here, so down that big back straight, the tyres can cool off a little bit before they have a big, heavy braking manoeuvre to perform. This track can, at some points, get the tyres a little bit hot, but it looks like they've been relatively under control. The tyre temperatures and the tyre wear rates this weekend so far. So combine that with a lower fuel load, the times are starting to tumble. Personal best coming in for a few drivers now. Guy Swarbrick, Alan Matthews and Will Inglis, who are on board with setting personal best through this sector. Previous lap 34.8 for Will Inglis, so flying along there. Alan Matthews has of course got past Paul Millman now and has a few seconds margin to boot. Now we start to ponder as to whether or not, with 4 minutes to go, that could be 3 or 4 laps at least. Maybe we'll say 4 laps. Can Alan Matthews keep up with Guy Swarbrick? We know in terms of outright pace that Alan Matthews by far has the upper hand to the tune of about 2.5 seconds. But currently, in terms of the pace at the moment, Guy Swarbrick is in the 37s, and that is actually his fastest lap of the race so far. Alan Matthews is not quite in the 35s anymore. He's in the low 36s. He has fresher tyres, of course, at this stage. So we'll make that about a second and a half. What we're thinking, 6 seconds, can it be done? It does. The maths certainly doesn't add up on that one. It's a 14-second margin, but if anything goes wrong in the cockpit of Guy Swarbrick's car, it could be Alan Matthews still on the podium in race 1 of this weekend. Of course, we have race 2, where for race 2 this evening, the whole grid will be reversed, and drivers will have to negotiate a slightly different race and use their racecraft wisely, and that's coming up in the next few minutes. But first, Guy Swarbrick, who's actually just posted a 38.8, so quite considerably slower than Alan Matthews on that last lap, is making things potentially a little bit more likely for Alan Matthews. They are, again, it's all potential, but they could be on for a battle if anything happens in Guy Swarbrick's car. I wonder if there was an issue on that last lap, although the tyres are dropping off now for some drivers. Look at that, the amount of understeer Guy had through the hairpin there leaves something to be desired. Anything could happen yet, although has Alan Matthews just had a big incident? We saw him lose a lot of time there, entry into the hairpin. It's 12 seconds once more. It was briefly about 15 seconds. Not sure what went on there. I don't think it will be possible for Alan Matthews, but anything could happen yet. Still up into P4. And of course, this benefits him immensely for that aforementioned reverse grid race coming up in a few minutes. I should mention, by the way, Will Inglis now 10 seconds clear of P2 and into the low 34s. 1 minute 34.3, a very impressive drive indeed. Well, I do apologise for the slightly quiet race finish then. My mic was not transmitting anything, so I really do apologise for that. You can see some victory donuts there, because of course, Will Inglis won. Pretty much you can sum up what I was saying. I was saying, congratulations, Will Inglis. Dominant display there. Paul Brady comes home P2. Guy Schwarbeck, an impressive podium. Nice to see him on the podium once again. Alan Matthews, arguably even more impressive drive because, you know, it was only 4 seconds off P3 by the very end there, so he really did push. And then Paul Millman rounding out running in P5. And so we see some more victory donuts from Will Inglis. And that is your historic look at race 1. I do apologise there for the lack of audio over the line there. Glad that we've got it all sorted. There go Will Inglis's rear tyres. So we'll see you in just a few minutes, ready for race 2. Here we are then, ladies and gentlemen, back on the grid, ready with a minute to go until lights out in race 2. On the grid, it's a reverse grid as well, so let's read out that order. It is Paul Millman and Alan Matthews. Watch out for him on the front row of the field here. Then we have on row 2, Guy Swarbrick and Paul Brady. Row 3, it is Will Inglis and Matt Daly. Matt Daly with a surprise appearance for race 2. He will certainly throw a spanner into the works. I do apologise. I really do apologise for that. Really does throw a spanner into the works for race 2. Matt Daly. Let's see what he can do with not long to go in this season. Of course, one last race then. It is 6 red lights on the gantry, and we are away. Already on that push-to-pass system, it is Paul Millman. In fact, I was about to say it's Alan Matthews. No, it is Paul Millman in his own car. But there is Alan Matthews in the similar liveried car, taking P1 up the inside of turn 1. Fantastic early race move to show his force there and use his pace advantage compared to Paul Millman to try and break away in the lead here. Because importantly for him, it is... I was about to say it is Paul Millman in P2 who can hold up the rest of the field. He has, however, dropped as we head onto that back straight now. First, it's Paul Brady pass and up into P2. Then it's Will Inglis up and into P3. And then Matt Daly in P4. But on that push-to-pass system with some slipstream is actually going to go around the outside of Will Inglis. Who's going to go later on the brakes then? Will Inglis, who has the inside line there, is able to take the position back. But the question is for how long. Matt Daly, of course, will benefit from some slipstream and all of this in P1 just a moment to go now. P5 with Guy Swarbrick for company as well. Not a great start to the race for him as they are nearly 3 wide there as Matt Daly seems to have struggled somewhat on the entry into the left-hander and remained in P4. Paul Millman, meanwhile, very much embroiled in a battle with Guy Swarbrick here as we head through that third sector. And Guy Swarbrick going a little bit too deep into the corner. We mentioned that corner can lure you in, and he was able to snatch it back, but only just over the curbs there. That looked like that could have been nasty. It could have cost him a lot of time. And there is Will Inglis having a big incident with a barrier there that takes out his front wing and upsets the car, and he stumbles all the way back to P6. What a disaster for Will Inglis. This is what we were just talking about before the audio dipped off in race 1. Unfortunately, this weekend is not stringing up in the way that he would have wanted. Let's go back on board with our race leader, Alan Matthews. He's under pressure though, and he's under pressure from Paul Brady. 0.4 of a second separating them as we head into the long back straight now. The inside line Paul Brady takes offers him a lot of time to play with there, but he doesn't get out of the corner quick enough. Alan Matthews actually able to carry more speed heading around the outside there, gave him more momentum onto the straight, and he seems to have benefited from it quite nicely, because even with a bit of a slipstream, even with the push to pass, Paul Brady not able to keep up with Alan Matthews, actually losing some time down that back straight then. Also in the mix here now, it is Matt Daly, of course. He is clear of those cars causing him any issues behind. He can now very much focus on this podium battle, this battle that I am sure at some point is going to be for the race lead, and he can show us why he wins this championship. We go back aboard with Alan Matthews, of course, half a second separating him and Paul Brady as we enter Sector 3 in the hotel section in just a moment's time there, as there's very nearly contact between them, as there was a lock-up. Wasn't though. Very close racing between Alan Matthews and Paul Brady. Paul Brady goes to the outside of the track. Again, that's another wall that can lure you, and you want to be careful you don't pull a Latifi as we head through that final corner and onto the start-finish straight once again. I must say, through that third sector, I thought maybe Paul Brady carrying more downforce down the straight. That's why he was losing time. So Sector 3, he'll claw it back. Opposite's happened. He's lost time to Alan Matthews and is now under pressure from Matt Daly as we head through that first sector once again. Matt Daly with 1 second apologies, not 1 second, with half a second to Paul Brady, and Paul Brady with 1 second. If we had DRS, he'll be out of that range now as we get onto that back straight once again. Who will win out in this game of momentum? Who can benefit from the slipstream the most? As I can tell you, it looks to be that Matt Daly is in a bit of a stalemate here. He's just about gaining enough time here. In fact, no, he is gaining time as he heads into the braking zone, then takes the inside line there. Textbook overtaking move. It is Matt Daly up into P2, and that is news that Alan Matthews certainly doesn't want to hear. You don't want that ominous yellow glow in the rear view mirrors, although the battle is still very much more between Matt Daly and Paul Brady as we head into Sector 3 in just a moment's time. Matt Daly very much still taking some defensive lines here and there to make sure Paul Brady doesn't find a window to attempt an overtaking move, and he certainly hasn't been able to just yet, but those defensive lines could be costing him in his battle with Alan Matthews. He's now within 1 second, or briefly was at least within 1 second of Alan Matthews. And we jump back onto that start-finish straight once again. The margin between Paul Brady and Matt Daly, 0.4 of a second, closing up ever so slightly. Matt Daly losing time then on the exit of the final corner on that lap. Meanwhile, Paul Brady and Alan Matthews posting their best laps of the race so far with a 36.2 and a 36.9 respectively. Actually, fastest driver overall was indeed Matt Daly, the only driver so far into the 35.3s. That's impressive with 20 minutes to go in this race. So that shows that Matt Daly does have the strongest pace by the looks of things so far this evening. He just hasn't been able to use it, hasn't been able to unlock it yet because he's been stuck in all of these battles. As we see Paul Brady wanting that battle to continue on, he jumps on the push-to-pass system but has lost a decent amount of time this time around. In fact, Matt Daly closer to Alan Matthews than he is Paul Brady, which is not news that Alan Matthews will take lightly. He does respond though with a fairly decent sector there as Paul Millman and Guy Swarbrick make contact, and that is big contact. Both come to a stop on track. They are heading through the chicane between the two straights, and that is disaster for both Guy Swarbrick and Paul Millman. Will Inglis, for whatever reason, I suspect he's had to go into the pits because he's only just about to cross over onto the third lap now, so he's not too far off being lapped here. Is quite a ways away, so this won't actually affect their races too much. As we see now, the entire podium covered by just 1 second here, as Alan Matthews and Matt Daly pretty much going too wide there as we head through the final corner now. Very little separating them. Paul Brady close as well. Not sure if Alan Matthews had his own incident or those two just got their act together and caught up. Either way, it's very much hotted up at the front end of the field now. We head through that first corner, and now we have all the elevation changes to negotiate here. And it settles down just a little bit as Alan Matthews seems to have been able to grip up, put the hammer down and build that gap ever so slightly, but nowhere near as much as he would want. That lockup certainly won't help as he goes a little bit wider through that corner in comparison to Matt Daly, and now you have to fear that Alan Matthews' run in the lead of this race coming to an end as he darts across the straight to try and break that slipstream. And Matt Daly not using that push-to-pass system just yet. He might be saving it for the next straight. Another prime usage of the push-to-pass system. Of course, we head through the chicane and get back onto the froth now. 3/10 separating Matt Daly and Alan Matthews. Matt Daly using that push-to-pass system, as is Paul Brady, and is having a look around the outside. Will he get the nose out before the braking zone? I think he will, but Alan Matthews takes the tighter inside line there and just about hangs on for now. But the outside line is arguably the more preferable line because it gives you the inside for the next two right-handers. And look at that there. That is now Matt Daly in the lead of this race. An impressive drive there, and already 0.7 of a second ahead of Alan Matthews. Alan Matthews, you wonder if he's been slightly perturbed by that one, as it's now Paul Brady with just 0.4 behind Alan Matthews next to try and put the pressure on. We saw pretty much nothing of Paul Brady in race one. This is more like it, Paul. Now the charge is really on as he starts to pressure Alan Matthews. Alan Matthews, though, is going to try everything to ignore Paul and maybe try and fight with Matt Daly. As we head through Sector 1, once again, 0.4 of a second separating Alan Matthews and Paul Brady. And there we see Paul Brady taking the inside line there. Alan Matthews has always been going wider through the left-hander into the back straight, and that could be costing him potentially. That incident has cost him because he now loses a bit of front aero. Of course, he was already down on some a little while back in race one. And there we have Paul Brady actually losing some time down that back straight as well, to the tune of about a second. Alan Matthews is now further behind Matt Daly than he has been so far, and that is not good in terms of the battle of these three, because the closer you are to a car, of course, the more powerful the slipstream effect is, to a point. If you're right on the rear spoiler, the effects could be a little bit negated in the other way, but you want to be ideally at least a few tenths behind, to at most a second, in order to get the most out of any form of tow, as there's a big lock up there as we head into the hotel section, and these three settling into their race a little bit more now. 15 minutes to go, we might be starting to see the fuel loads lighten a little bit, the balance of the car changing, but the tyre's not giving up just yet, so we start to see the lap times tumble a little bit more. We've already seen a couple of 35s. Matt Daly's the first to do so, and Paul Brady has joined him in that club as well. We, of course, finished the previous race in the low 34s briefly from Willingless, I believe. So if we can see that again, that would be very impressive. And I think if anyone's going to do it, it will be Matt Daly, I suspect, because he's already getting oh so close to the 34s at the 35.1 on that last lap. And speaking of oh so close, this battle between Alan Matthews and Paul Brady could be continuing on here. Just half a second separating these two drivers. Paul Brady on that push-to-pass system, but it doesn't look like he's able to close up Paul Brady, because as we found out a little while ago, Paul Brady's car, he wasn't making any time in Sector 3, but he also wasn't making any time in the second sector either as we headed down those long back straights. The car looked like it was carrying more downforce, and we could be seeing evidence of that. He was on the push-to-pass system, but still not gaining any time in comparison to Alan Matthews there. So an interesting one for the setup for Paul Brady, as it is still Matt Daly leading this race. As we see now, that gap between Alan Matthews and Paul Brady expanding even more, now stands at about 1.5 seconds. Those times tumbling down, as I mentioned. Matt Daly currently on his best lap, or on for at least his best lap of the race so far. Purple through the first sector, 48.5, very competitive indeed through that first sector. Alan Matthews, a 30, sorry, did I say 30? I'll try it again. Matt Daly, a 38.5. We'll try again for a third time. Third time lucky, folks. A 48.5 through that first sector. That is purple, of course. The next one, Alan Matthews, a 48.8, and then not actually gaining any time on this lap, Paul Brady. So now standing at about 1.1 seconds behind Alan Matthews, gaining time actually through this third sector. That might be what we expect with the high downforce setup as we get back onto the start-finish straight, and it could still be a decent lap from Paul Brady here, just not quite the likes of what Matt Daly has done in that previous lap with a 34.8, the fastest lap of this race so far. In terms of the battle between Guy Swarbrick and Paul Millman, there isn't too much of a battle at the moment because Guy Swarbrick has the upper hand in terms of pace. There seems to be about a second of lap quicker at the moment, so he is consolidating that P4 furthermore. In fact, if Matt Daly hadn't joined in, Guy Swarbrick would still be on for a podium here in this race, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, would be his first, and I'm sure he can probably correct me on this, would be his first double podium ever. If I'm not mistaken. that we've seen from him in streams over the past few seasons. So that would be very impressive indeed. But unfortunately, for him at least, Matt Daly has shown up, but we are very thankful for that because he's showing us why he deserves this championship. He's leading this race and has made some great overtakes as well. 1.1 seconds currently the gap between Alan Matthews and Paul Brady. It's very much a game of cat and mouse between these two cars. At any point of the lap, mainly Sector 1 and Sector 2, Alan Matthews having the upper hand and then clawing it right back at the end of the lap. It is Paul Brady, now just half a second separating these two cars. And of course, let's watch them now heading through that first sector and see if that gap changes. Paul Brady actually posting his best lap of the race so far. Nope, not quite. But getting close, it's a 36.1, and that is stronger than his past few laps at least. And where we see him losing some time once again through the high-speed corners. And I imagine losing some time now as we get back on to the start-finish straight. A lot of smoke coming out of Alan Matthews' car. I'm not sure if that's just a visual glitch, because we wouldn't usually see that type of wheel spin out of that corner, given it's a decently high-speed corner. And so, it could just be the case it was big enough lock-up that the smoke stayed with the car for a little bit. Either way, Alan Matthews is expanding that lead to Paul Brady once again. I think Paul Brady really suffering with drag down those straights. Gets onto that push-to-pass system to try and negate those effects, but the damage could be done here. And there we see clawing it back once again through that final sector. Alan Matthews and Paul Brady continuing on, just half a second separating them now. And it's almost like it's an expanded concertina effect. They're just like an accordion. They're just constantly yo-yoing between each other. They are getting very close and then growing further apart once again. And there we see heading down that back straight now. The gaps expands to about 1 second now, 1.1 second. And let's see this. Let's watch the line through chicane. Actually, under braking seems to be another point on that part of the track where Alan Matthews makes up a lot of time. Not sure what to make of that one. If that is just an anomaly on this lap in particular, but we see on the exit of the chicane there, that is now where Paul Brady is deploying that push to pass. But I get the feeling that because he's not using it on the straight prior, he's not able to keep close enough to benefit from any slipstream. So that means that while, yes, he's using a bit of push to pass, he also isn't combining it with any slipstream at that point. So he's losing time as a result, potentially. Not that I am any proper expert on this. That'll be my estimation at least. Unless that would mean that the second straight is just really awful without a bit of push pass. Who knows? Anyway, we see that gap now closing once again as we head through that final corner. I should point out Matt Daly now leading by about 6 seconds. An impressive drive from him so far. Margin between Guy Strawbeck and Paul Millman remaining at about 7 seconds. And Willingham unfortunately taking himself out of this race early on. But continuing on, which is good spirit from him. In terms of the championship order then, pretty much nothing changes, of course, at this stage in the season, but the points tally has. Now, Jack Hodson is still staying on 139 points, I believe. And then we have, of course, he DNF'd from the previous race. Paul Millman into the 100 points club, of course, now with 106 points to his name. This time a little bit closer. Paul Brady down the back straight, but we see Alan Matthews weaving to break that slipstream, working to good effect there. But it must be said, a lot closer this time round in comparison to where he usually is through the straights. This could be the lap then for Paul Brady as we head down the next straight part of the lap. Get ready to head towards Sector 3 in just a moment's time. The gap stands at about 1.1 seconds, so not quite the chasm that it usually is at this stage on track, but still not ideal for Paul Brady at least. Still 1 second separating him now. And more importantly for him, this is where his car comes to life. This is where it starts to look good for him. As we head into the hotel section in just a moment. 0.6 of a second, 0.7 of a second, 0.5 of a second as we head under that glamorous hotel. And now we head into the two right-handers towards the end of the lap here. Only 0.5 second separating them. Can Paul Brady pressure an error from Alan Matthews through that very unforgiving final corner? We've seen it in the past plenty of times. He doesn't. Alan Matthews keeps an upper hand on it, but that is a strong lap from Paul Brady. 35.8 on that last lap, one of his best of the session so far. Meanwhile, speaking of his best of the session so far, Matt Daly, 2 purple seconds on that previous lap, and that put him into the 33s. So when I was saying 34.3 on the cards, nope, smashed it, 33.9. That would have put him on pole in qualifying. A very impressive feat indeed. The fuel load really getting light now with 5 minutes to go in this session. Let's have another look then at this battle between Alan Matthews and Paul Brady. Down that straight, Paul Brady's Achilles heel, of course, and it looks to be the case once again. That gap expanding as we head into the braking zone. As this battle continues on, just 3.5 minutes to go in this race. Now 1.3 seconds separating them, a slightly wider margin than what we've seen so far this evening. The slightly slimmer margin is the one between Guy Swarbrick and Paul Millman. Not sure if he had an error on the previous lap or something along those lines, but the gap now standing at about 5 seconds. In terms of their pace at the moment, it looks to be that Guy Swarbrick still doesn't actually have the upper hand anymore by about 0.5 second. Guy Swarbrick seems to be slightly slower. I don't think that'll be enough to make a major difference in this race, but anything can happen yet. Flames on the overrun there for Guy Swarbrick as he heads into the braking zone there. The gap between Alan Matthews and Paul Brady, rather, now standing at about 2 seconds. So Paul Brady losing out big time through Sector 2 there. Matt Daly, meanwhile, expanding his lead to around about 10 seconds, which is what we saw from Will Inglis, of course, towards the end of race 1. So an impressive drive from both him and Matt Daly this evening. So less than a minute to go in this session, and it has been an impressive drive for Matt Daly as he jumps back onto that long back straight. There is Will Inglis, his once rival, unfortunately a lap down in this race. Not a race to remember for him, which is a shame because it's how we end this season of Formula Alpha action. 24 seconds to go, so we will be just about ready to start the final lap of this race. As we see Will Inglis there still ahead as we watch Alan Matthews and Paul Brady. That gap has expanded to about 1.3 seconds. In fact, no, more like 1.7 seconds. So that battle pretty much all said and done, unfortunately. And this is, of course, the final lap. So we're watching for one last time this year, and potentially ever, the RSS Supreme, which has been a faithful companion to us, a brilliant car to drive, heads round the last few corners. And we bid farewell to both this car and this season with an impressive drive from Matt Daly. He rounds that final corner for one last time in 2023 and jumps back onto the throttle with a 14-second lead. Crossing the line there, it's Matt Daly who takes the race to victory. Congratulations, Matt, for a very strong drive from the back end of the grid. Next to come across the line, of course, is Alan Matthews. Alan Matthews, a very strong effort in this weekend and this season, of course, as well. He comes across to take P2, and then Paul Brady, second in the championship, third in this race, with a mighty fine battle between 1.3 drivers in the top three, and then between Alan Matthews and Paul Brady there in the end. Missing out on a podium this time, then we have to wait a little while for him. It will be Guy Swarbrick, so we might enjoy some end-of-season donuts, which don't come about very often, of course. But it is a nice way to celebrate what has been a great year's worth of driving. I hope you've enjoyed watching this year as much as I've enjoyed commentating it. It has been a brilliant season. Maybe a bit of a diminuendo to the season this evening, but there have been some other absolute corkers, really, this season, more so than any other season, I'd argue. And of course, we get ready for not only the Winter Series, but 2024 as well, as Guy Swarbrick gets ready to cross the line to come home P4, and not too far behind him, it is Paul Millman. Paul Millman joining that 100-point club, of course, this season, this evening, and comes home P5. Commiserations to Will Inglis, a race to forget, really, for a man who has demonstrated great pace so far this season. He will be coming home with a P6 in this race, so still some points at least. As we see, Alan Matthews has been enjoying some victory donuts. Who else has been? Guy Swarbrick is in the midst of some victory donuts, and Matt Daly is enjoying his parade lap. Well, let's celebrate with some donuts. No rear tyre left on Guy Swarbrick's car, of course. I think Matt Daly might be going around the lap to do the proper donuts part of this lap, which is either start-finish straight or the hotel section, and we have our answer. There we are, to see out the season just like we do in Formula 1. Thank you, Matt Daly. And it's a goodbye from me for 2023 as well. So thank you for watching.